So the Marvel aspect of my channel is kind of in a weird situation. And the reason why I say that is we had Secret Empire, and then we have Marvel Legacy #1, the one shot that will basically set the stage for the future of Marvel's publishing arm. We don't know exactly what's going to come next, but what we do know is that in the interim between the time that these stories start getting published and right now, we have Marvel Generations. And Marvel Generations are just one-shots. They seem to be filler stories, but they may also tie into things later on down the line. But Marvel publishes their comics monthly, which means that we have a lot of time until a lot of these stories begin to wrap up. And so until we do, I've just been grabbing like random stories, different things that I thought would be kind of fun to cover, and just sort of throwing them in there, throwing them out there and seeing how you guys respond. But this is a story where Wolverine breaks the claws, I'm sorry, that Sabertooth breaks the claws of Wolverine. And it's really cool because this is actually one of the more interesting stories about Sabertooth. Really, this all goes back to the first fight between Wolverine and Sabertooth himself. And the reason why is because in Marvel, you have two versions of the Sabertooth character. You have the modern version that we see in like the Weapon X stories, different things like that, who's a lot more toned down. Then you have classic Sabertooth, who is just like a mindless beast and like a force of nature. He is savage in the extreme. It's crazy. I can't think of very many characters out there right now that could actually stand against classic Sabertooth. I mean, within reason, like the Incredible Hulk easily, but when it comes to like the Wolverine family, like X-23 or Dakin or something like that, even Old Man Logan would probably get wrecked by classic Sabertooth. I mean, he was just an absolute nightmare. But the first time that Wolverine and Sabertooth ever fought one another, Wolverine was actually spared. He was saved by the combined efforts of a woman named Viper and a guy named Seraph. Now, Seraph ended up dying in the entire conflict, but Viper went on to basically have this sort of life debt that was owed by Wolverine, in the sense that Wolverine said, because you spared my life, I owe you, I owe you my life. I owe you a debt. Now the idea is that that debt will be called upon somewhere along the line. We don't know when, we don't know where, and we don't know what the favor will be asked, of Viper. What we do know is that when that request is made, Logan is honor bound to fill it. And that's why things are kind of crazy, because this also ties into the element of a place called Madripoor. Now, Madripoor is one of these places in Marvel Comics that, for the most part, heroes give it a pretty wide berth. I mean, it's really just allowed to be its own thing. Now, it is an actual territory in Southeast China, and it does have its own chancellor, ruling body, different things like that. But it's really one of these places where it's like, as long as the existing status, that is to say, the government's ability to control the island, or at least to rule the island, as long as everybody does what they're supposed to do, as long as the status quo is not upset, then people can do whatever they want to. It's basically, you look away, I look away. And so Madripoor is essentially just a giant haven for criminals. Anybody who's anybody in the criminal sphere knows about Madripoor. Now, with regards to Wolverine, the reason why this is important is because he basically became this kind of mercenary for hire within Madripoor proper, but he built up a reputation for himself. When Wolverine comes for you, your days are numbered. And that's just the way it is. A lot of people contracted him, but a lot of people also have their hands in Madripoor. The Hand has their hands in Madripoor, no pun intended. Hydra is involved in Madripoor. Almost everybody there. Mystique operates out of Madripoor. A lot of people are based out of that place. Even S.H.I.E.L.D. does not go into Madripoor, because if they do, then it's basically, hey, you come here, whatever happens to you, and the world's going to turn a blind eye. A lot of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents have gone missing in Madripoor, so it's one of those crazy situations. But with this whole life debt of Wolverine, what we end up finding out is the sitting chancellor of Madripoor has basically been ousted. Now, I do not remember the circumstances as to why. I believe that was covered in Marvel Presents issues 1 through 10, but maybe that focused explicitly on Wolverine and his actions in Madripoor proper. I can't remember off the top of my head, but regardless of why it is, there is no ruling figure in Madripoor. The idea here is that Viper is actually working to become the head of Madripoor. Now, those of you guys who have read about her character intermittently, you may have seen her in different comics, different things like that. This is how all that comes to fruition. Viper is one of these characters who is very much involved in the criminal underworld. As Madam Hydra, for example, she's played a lot of significant roles, but her her position as ruling Madripoor is probably the most significant that she's played, because the person who rules Madripoor basically gets a cut of like everything that goes on. It's basically one of these things of, hey, you put money in our pockets, we'll make sure nobody comes looking for you. And so because of that, It is very much a scenario where if a person can take the ruling of Madripoor, then ultimately they're going to benefit by it. It's going to be one of these really cool scenarios. And so again, it's one of these things where we end up finding out that what Viper had done is that because of the fact that she couldn't just knock on the doorstep of the Xavier Institute because she's a villain, because she's wanted in virtually every country that does not have an extradition treaty, or that does have an extradition treaty, what ends up happening is she actually brainwashes a litany of the various women in Marvel Comics that have been associated with Wolverine. Now, these include characters like Danny Moonstar, these include Rogue, Kitty Pryde, Jubilee, the whole 9 yards. If they are in any form or fashion associated with Wolverine, then they're brainwashed for the purpose of bringing him to Madripoor. Now, of course, this leads into the actual marriage of Viper and Wolverine, and this leads into the arrival of Sabertooth, because what happens is that in the middle of this marriage, once this whole ceremony takes place, Sabertooth just pops up. Now, here's something that I want you guys to keep in mind. A lot of the questions that I've seen, and I was actually asking on Twitter about this, about how people like Sabertooth, different things like that. One of the things that people seem to believe is that Sabertooth never had adamantium. That's actually not true. When Sabertooth underwent the same Weapon X/Weapons Plus project that gave Wolverine his adamantium, Sabertooth did not originally get it. He did not originally receive adamantium. He just had a healing factor. Sometime between the point when he first faced Wolverine and this story, he received adamantium-laced claws and adamantium bones. Now, I do not believe there is a comic book explanation for how he got that. And if there is, I haven't been able to find it. So somebody please chime in down in the comments, and let me know if there is an actual answer to that, so I can pin that comment and everybody can know where to find it. But the idea is that with him showing up here, he's more dangerous than he's ever been. Because with Wolverine having had adamantium as well as a healing factor, no matter what damage Sabertooth ever did to him, in the end, he would always end up overcoming the damage Sabertooth did. He would always end up healing, and then with his adamantium, he would just tear Sabertooth to shreds, absent their first fight. With this scenario, Wolverine does not have adamantium. Now, this goes all the way back to Fatal Attractions, and that's one of the cool things about this. Fatal Attractions was a story, and we'll cover this, once we get, further into a little more X-Men stuff, assuming that you guys, care about this at all. But Fatal Attractions was a story where Marvel was actually trying to rework the character of Magneto. There was a time for about 10 years or so when Magneto was a good guy and a bad guy. It was really sort of an interesting scenario. He was one of the first and most notable and even the most dangerous enemies of the X-Men. Eventually, he went to lead the X-Men and then reformed himself. When X-Men Volume 2, issue number 1 came out in 1992, what Marvel wanted to do was basically send Magneto back to being a bad guy. And the best way to make him look like a bad guy was to strip Wolverine of his adamantium. Now, one of the other misconceptions is that when Wolverine lost his adamantium, he immediately went into a feral state. Again, that's actually not true. What ended up happening is that Wolverine functioned like his normal self. He went on as a member of the X-Men, albeit with bone claws instead of adamantium. It was not until the son of Cable came along and actually tried to rebond Wolverine with adamantium and then failed. After that, Apocalypse was the one who successfully rebonded adamantium to Wolverine's skeleton using the adamantium of Sabertooth. So it was really kind of a cool scenario, this really interesting journey with Wolverine proper. But the fact that he's popped up here, the fact that he has adamantium is a huge deal because his healing factor has always been there. That's one of the reasons why it is that Sabertooth and Wolverine always fought so severely. But in this circumstance, the tables are turned. Try as he might, Wolverine can inflict damage, but it's only bone claws. It's only skin deep. Going against, an adamantium skeleton basically turns Wolverine into the weaker guy here. It seems like there's absolutely no way for him to end up pulling this off. But notice how severe and how intense this battle is. This is one of the reasons why people look at the feud between Sabertooth and Wolverine as being one of the greatest feuds in the history of comics, because these characters have fought time and time and time again, and they have had some brutal fights. I mean, we're talking about just like cleaving flesh. We're talking about, just mutilating each other in the extreme because they fight to kill. And that's the crazy thing about this, because when he became feral Wolverine, he took off into the woods and he was intense and he was extreme and it was amazing. It was such a cool read. But ultimately, in the middle of this conflict where Wolverine tries to face off against Sabertooth, basically tries to attack him after Sabertooth plays possum, Sabertooth ends up using his adamantium claws to snap the bones of Wolverine, to basically destroy his bone claws. Now, this is huge because what this does is it basically sets the stage for things to start moving in the direction of Wolverine getting his adamantium back, because that's one of the things that Marvel did when it came to these 1990s stories in a lot of ways. You know, it really built on the Chris Claremont era of storytelling that they began the process of focusing on one character, and they would tell this massive story about this character that would span some 10 years in terms of building them up, showing all their moral compasses, different things like that. Nowadays, you don't really get writing like that anymore. Nowadays, a character's development, lasts 6 issues, and that's really about it. Then they move on to the next guy. And so it seems like gone are the days where you get this decade-long character build. The last time I would say anything like that really happened was with the character of Cyclops, where Marvel began the process of turning Cyclops into a bad guy. But recently, it's all really just been events. It's been the Avengers versus the X-Men, Red Skull getting the brain of Charles Xavier during Axis. It's really all just these major conflicts and different things like that. So character building has sort of begun to go away. Now, in truth, Kitty Pryde's ability to phase is just as good as it ever was, right? I mean, she hasn't like lost her phasing power. What this does is it actually highlights one of the big weaknesses of Kitty Pryde. With Wolverine being thrown down the side of a mountain, presumably, basically being left for dead, what this does is it leaves us with the possibility that Kitty Pryde may very well be killed by Sabertooth, which again is kind of cool because, well, not cool that she's going to be killed, but it's kind of cool because what this does is it leads into the next story, which actually deals directly with the aftermath, and it deals with Sabertooth, Kitty Pryde, and Wolverine actually having to work together. But with that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.